Hey, what's up, guys? John Silva here, and today we're gonna create a fantasy landscape. So let's get right into it. Start with a rough sketch. At this point, this is where you really want to know what you're gonna be drawing. Once you decide the landscape where you're at, you want to try to imagine that you're a cameraman, right? And where do you want to be placed in the environment, in the whether it's high fantasy, sci-fi, whatever. It's always a good idea to um, try to imagine that you have a map and where are you going to be located, and where is your camera pointing at, right? Usually you want to imagine a place of interest so that you know we so that it's interesting, right? For me, I decided to go with green scenery, but I want my main focal point to have cool colors. So I decided to go for a frozen area. Now the whole scene is not going to be frozen. Just this one particular area. I'm already thinking ahead of time, or already thought ahead of time what I want to draw, and that's very important too. It's cool to sketch around and stuff, but at one point you have to decide what you're gonna do, unless you like winging it. But usually deciding on um, on what you want to do beforehand, you're gonna have a much better result, right? You won't be all over the place. Now I'm starting to to start paint right on top of our sketch, and I must say that usually I don't actually start painting right away on top. I usually divide the scene into three sections, which is foreground, middle ground, and background. So I have three layers with opaque shapes, and I paint within those shapes. But since this is a very simple scene for me, I decided why not uh, go ahead and just jump right into it and get it over with. Also, it's very important to mention that doing the background first, regardless whether I have layers on or not, I tend to uh, use the start painting on the background first, because the background in itself gives you all this kind of informations that you need throughout the whole rest of the picture. So I tend to get rid of that or get on with it rather fast, because, well, it gives me all the information you need to continue painting uh, throughout the whole image. Just filling in some shapes, giving some shift of hues, make things a little bit more interesting in color. Now those mountains are not just one single color, and every mountain I like to divide with clouds, because, well, separation is read more easily that way. Now keep on cleaning up a little bit before we move on towards our middle ground. Now I must say that as I was seconds ago saying, that I like to divide my mountains with either fog or clouds, anything that's gonna give a soft look to it and has a contrast in edge with the mountains. It's gonna be good for me. I like that. I like that a lot. Also, the more separation you have, the deeper your scene is gonna look like. You're gonna be able to sell your perspective much easier. Should talk a little bit about idea generating. Now, when you're creating these fantasy landscapes, how exactly can you make it fantasy looking, right? Well, what makes it fantasy looking, or um, any other type of sci-fi, for example? Now, the first thing that you should look for are shapes. Now, I mentioned this all over my videos. Um, Shapes are extremely important no matter what you do, but for environments, it's even more so, I believe. Now, I'm not super expert on environments. It's not the main thing I paint, but I do know for a fact that um, the shapes have to read very well, whether it's for a game or whatever you're using it for. If you're walking around that scenery, everything should read quite nicely. Now, now that you know that you're looking for mainly shapes, how can you use that to your advantage? And one idea would be to choose whatever object you have around laying around you have laying it around your house, and use that intricate shape to use that shape and implement it in your painting, for example, or in a few areas where you know or where you want your viewers to look at, right? Now, for me, I I went the easy way because we have time restraint, but I thought that using the waterfall and making the waterfall frozen is going to be unique already, because that doesn't happen very often, at least. And also, color is it can make a landscape or whatever you're drawing more fantasy like, even though you can base it on a reality. If you just adjust the hues a little bit on and off, and you just don't make everything one single color, um, it tends to bring that fantasy uh, mood to it. Right here, I am adding another cloud in between the soon to be waterfall, frozen waterfall. Right now, it's a bit, but it was quite tricky. This waterfall was quite tricky, so I spent the majority of time I spent actually on the waterfall. It's not every day that I draw that. So, as I was saying, using other unique shapes that your hand wouldn't normally do right away, it's extremely important. For example, like those mountains right there, they don't have to be that shape. I could take something, I don't know, like a coffee machine, or anything that has a more intricate shape. Like you use that shape and turn it into something common, although the shape itself is not common, like a mountain, right? A mountain is a common thing, but using the shape of something uncommon is going to create a much more interesting shape reading, right? Automatically becomes more unique. It's not common. Fantasy setting is all about making it uncommon looking, right? Whether it's light is the third thing I look at or go after. Interesting light, even adjusting reality in a way where, for example, the light that I'm doing has a green tint to it. Usually light doesn't, red light never really reacts that way, especially on a clear day. You don't really see like light hitting and being green. Usually it's a yellow orange tone, and I do have that, so I mix it in. I have this blue scene, this blue frozen waterfall, and the dragon itself is also either crystallized or is just fully made of ice, like a sculpture, right? I'll leave that to the viewers. Decide whether they want the dragon to be alive, their imagination, let their imagination run wild, and decide for themselves what it is. As I was saying, yeah, with the light, if you tweak or adjust just a little bit and give a couple of adjustments so that you're not too far away from reality, but you change it so enough that it's unique. It's not as it's not common, right? Oh, I must mention here, there's a little bit of a jump on the waterfall. I honestly have no idea what happened here. I think the file, I just had to restart drawing and the file didn't record the whole thing. But I'll explain what I've done. Basically, I made the highlights lighter, and I made sure that the value separation, if you notice, the whole blue part of the frozen waterfall has a value range, right? I don't go too dark and I don't go overly white. It is quite bright in some areas, but essentially what I'm doing right now, it's just what I've done throughout the whole thing. Also, I gave a little empty space right next to the rock where it's darker, and we can see the spikes from the waterfall, just to give, I drew those spikes overall just to give a sense of motion. Like, the waterfall doesn't stop. So if it's frozen midair, you'd have that kind of look to it. And I added that darker parts just to show a little bit underneath where there's other water particles, or however you want to call them. It's just one more excuse to give depth. Always looking for depth, especially in environments. Personally, to me, that's the number one thing or I go for. I'm doing a little bit of cleanup right now, and yeah, I just wanted to fill in a little bit more about coming up with ideas, right? So we talked about uniqueness, we talked about shape, light, etc. But really do try to mix things mix shapes that are uncommon, even to the point where, I don't know, take a photo and then cut that shape, right? And then paint something completely irrelevant within the boundary of that shape, right? So I don't know, I got a remote control here, right? So what can you use this for? Maybe this could be a dragon head. Did you ever think about that? If I put it like that, for example, this could be the horns instead, going to the front, and then the rest could be a head shape. Like, you can use any shape, anything, to your advantage and make it unique. And also you can mix and match other shapes. And I keep saying, I feel like a broken record, but it really is important using your shapes like that, so that you can create things that people haven't seen much. Now, I could use, on this picture, I could use myself the same the same advice, but you guys have much more time than me in terms of, you can spend more time in one piece alone. Looking at the piece right now, I'm still gonna add a couple more elements to bring the piece together, but overall I feel like I went the head of the dragon could be more unique looking, but for the sake of speed and not being here forever, I drew something a bit more simple. But it's interesting to look at least. Like, that's the point. One thing I didn't mention though is what I'm doing right now. I use smudge tool throughout the painting quite a lot, and basically I just pick up a brush that has a bunch of triangles, and I go over some areas where I want to have that kind of crystallized effect. There's really not much to it. Any brush you have, or you can create your own. We have a video on that, how to create your own Photoshop brushes. It's very, very easy to set one up. I'm finally starting to clean the dragon. Another thing I should mention is separation of elements, right? Things that are closer to you generally are darker in value, and as they go further into the atmosphere, for example, in the bright day, the further they are from you, the more of a blue tint there is to them, especially in the shadows. You really, really see like deep blues in the shadows on, like, I don't know, if you live in a city or in, you know, in a farm or something. Like if you're in a farm, like you probably can see mountains, and like further away in the mountains, like around the horizon, you can see that it's much more in the shadows. There's like a deep blue. But again, the weather has a lot to do with this. It's not always 100% like that. Just take that into consideration. And yeah, as I was saying, separating, putting each element that you're drawing into a value group. So if you notice, like the silhouette of my dragon keeps having the same value range throughout the whole dragon part, and then the rocks around it exactly the same, and then everything is separated. You get what I'm saying? And the mountains, you can see the silhouette. The silhouette is extremely important when it comes to environment. It's like it goes hand to hand with the shapes, right? In terms of importance, you can make an awesome looking shape, but if it's buried under messy values, then there's really not. There was really not a point for you to put that in there, was there? I'm just doing a little bit of cleanup again. Always try to add even small elements to your picture can go a long way. To me personally, one thing I was struggling with until the very end was like each element are big in size. Therefore, you can't really tell what's the scale of things. And I noticed that at the end, and I do a couple of adjustments and elements, but not as much as I should have. And that's also another important thing when creating environments in general. The proportion of things is quite important. Like, how big is this head? You have a rough idea of how big, for example, a mountain is, and then you compare it to a cloud, right? Clouds can be all shapes and sizes, but still you have a relatively good idea how big they are. And then there's those rocks. Rocks can appear pretty big if you're in a close-up to them, right? So it tricks your eye a little bit. So adding anything that's more common. Here I'm just trying to adjust the mouth of the dragon, because it wasn't matching too much with my sketch, and I like the sketch one better. But as I was saying, try to add more common elements. I wanted to add some trees at the horizon. You see right under the clouds next to the dragon's mouth. I want to add some kind of vegetation or trees or anything that's more common for anybody who's looking at it, but it wasn't enough, and I didn't clean it up enough either. So things like plants, flowers, even small buildings. There could be a small building around there. Now here I am using the smudge tool again. This is actually quite handy, using the smudge tool for this. But still, anyway, one thing I should mention though if you're using the smudge tool to create this kind of effects, you still anyway have to go with your normal brush and paint it by hand and fix all the things that are not so good looking or are a little bit too messy. But yeah, adding any type of element for scale, it's like top 3, really, like when creating any kind of environment. And also, of course, you should be looking at reference, because if you're creating something just out of your like you're imagining it, right, you'll tend to go for things that are too common, and it also can be a problem, because if you especially in fantasy settings, you're always looking for that kind of uniqueness, or whatever that means, either the design of the place or the place itself. Yeah, you always want to look for reference for things that you would normally think of. Now here I'm starting to add the plants, and automatically, like, it brings the scale back. You're already like, oh, okay, if the grass is that tall, or if the plants are this big, then you tell right away, okay, that thing's like relatively big, you know. And the waterfall is not like a huge waterfall, but it's like a medium size. And right away after that, you look at the mountains in the distance, you're like, oh, okay, those mountains are pretty damn big. Now I felt that the dragon head was a little bit out of place. I mean, yes, it's frozen or just simply sculpted in ice, but still, it felt like it's the only design element in that, like, right dead on in the center. So I wanted to add a little bit more around the edges of the canvas. You know how usually dragons have those wings and like the hooks that come out at the top. That's essentially what I'm doing here, and I'll add another one further away just to, give one more layering effect in just a bit. Now there we go. I had just one there behind. Maybe there's more frozen waterfall, like, that goes around the corner, and his wing thing is just popping up. Unfortunately, I don't add much more from the dragon, but looking at it, I wish I could have added the wing coming out like in the corner where the waterfall is closer to us, like almost near the very foreground, the very dark green foreground. I wish I could have like the wing either under the eyes showing through, like the silhouette, or bits and pieces of the end of the wing coming through. I think that would look pretty cool. And then again, it's a matter of practice. You can do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like 20 of these, and you can develop from the first one that you've drawn. Since this is a video for you guys, I basically have only one shot at this. So I mean, I really don't. I could have just make 10 of them and then record the 11th one, but I want to show you I really want to show you how it is to make things up on the go, like as real as possible, without much preparation, without as real as it gets, because professionals can make things look a little bit more fancy than they actually are. All right, nobody likes showing their weaknesses. So hopefully this gives you some courage to go in and do your own fantasy landscapes. Messing a little bit around with the glow and still cleaning things up. But yeah, I definitely would add more smaller elements. I feel like I only have big to medium elements aside from the grass and the plants. Aside from that, but yeah, definitely, if you're doing this, um, add three types of or more three sizes of shapes. You know, a big ones, a few of them, medium ones, a few of them, and small ones, a few of them. Now the ratio, it's up to you on how much you want them to be. If you want more of the smaller ones, you know, every single decision you make is your own and it's unique. And at the same time, you're just gonna get a different result, right? Now, by drawing the dragon frozen, as I mentioned, I wanted to leave it to the viewers to imagine if it's actually frozen or if you know, if it's if someone went there and sculpted it. Just giving a little bit glow, and we're close to the end. Tidying things up. Now, I would just like to mention that I wouldn't consider this finished, more of a almost halfway. And also, it took me about, I think, 4 hours around that time. And obviously, you're watching the sped up video. So yeah, I would like you guys to let us know if you like it, if you want more of this, and see you on the next video.